So let's start by creating two folders. So we'll be creating our backend folder, and also we create another folder that's the front end folder. So basically the backend folder will be responsible for our server-side mobile application logics, and within the front end we'll be creating our Flutter app. So let's pop up the terminal over here and change the directory to the front end folder. So in here we need to create our Flutter app, and the command is flutter create. Since we are creating it within the front end, we proceed with the period. So it will create our Flutter app within the front end. There you guys, you can see over there. So let's do the same to our backend. So I'll be adding an additional terminal over here. So you can see we have successful creation. So in here, let's change the directory to our backend and initialize our node app. So the way we do that, it's npm init-y. There you go. So in here, it will create a packet.json file within the backend. That's the minimal setup to run your server. So in here, first of all, let's install our Express app or Express dependency. So basically, Express provide a framework for handling requests, defining routes, and also managing of middlewares. So that's the main difference. So once we have a successful installation of our Express app within the backend directory, let's create a file, and I'm going to name this file as the server.js. There we go. So when we check the packet.json file, you can see we have our Express dependency installed, right? So within the server.js, let's import our Express. And the way we do that is const Express equal, then we require our Express. So in here, I would like to comment out what I'll be doing over here. There's going to be an app configuration over here. And also there's also going to be a middleware configuration. There's going to be a middleware configuration over here. And we'll also be defining our API routes. And finally a listener for the app to listen on. So these are the four major things we're doing, right? So in our app configuration, we create an instance of our Express app, and that's const app is called Express. And that is the way we create our instance of the Express app. I'll also be creating a port variable for the app to listen on. So const port is equal to 3000. And within our middleware configuration, we will be using our express.json. So we use app.use, then we pass in our express.json. So that's basically it. So within the API route is where we'll be configuring our CRUD applications, right? So within the API route, there'll be our CRUD application, basically the get, the post, the put, and also the delete functionality. So the listeners, we call upon our app.listen. So we are going to listen to a particular port, then we pass in the port with a callback function. So in here, I'll just log it out. So console.log listen on port, then I'll pass in the port we are listening on. So that's basically the minimal setup for our server. So if you want to access the port variable in a string format, make sure you use the backtick. So that way you can access the port variable in a string format. So this is the basic server layout. So we'll be focusing within the API route for our CRUD operations, right? So we start with our app.get method, right? So the endpoint is going to be /API/version1, then /items. So that's the endpoint. So in here we'll be having our callback function with a request and also a response as a parameter. So I'll repeat this 3 more times, right? So the first one is going to be the get, the next one is going to be the post request, and we'll be hitting the same endpoint. There's also going to be a put request for an update, right? So to update a particular item, you need to get the item ID. So we're going to access that item ID from the params. And the last one is going to be the delete method, right? We also need to get the ID. So these are CRUD operations. If you want to set up a database, connection, you can do so, but I'll be just creating a list of items that's going to hold the items temporarily, right? So you can just set up a database, for example, like the MongoDB stuff. So I just define my list items over here. I'll be using the MongoDB for my database. So basically, I'll create an item list that's going to be an array. That's going to be an array. There you go. So in the get request, right, let's structure how we are going to collect the items. So we are basically going to get the ID and also the name of the item, right? So this is the format in the item list, right? So you can have a list of items. So during the get, we'll be returning our response.json. Then we pass in our item list. So this line of code is going to get all our item within the item list, right? So that's basically it. And within the post request, right? First of all, I'll be creating a variable for our new tags, right? Our new item going to be added. So with the ID, we take the item list length and add one for any new creation of our item. And the name is going to be from our request body. Then we access the name, right? So the name is going to be from our request body. Then we access the name. There you go. So this is basically going to be it. And once we have our new tags, we take our item list and push onto that our new tags. Then we set a response JSON. First of all, let's set a response status to T01 for a successful creation. Then we set it to a JSON. Then we pass in our new tags. So let's move on to our put request. First of all, let's rename the new tags variable to new item. That makes a little more sense. In the put request, that's where our update is going to take place. So to update a particular item, you need to grab the item ID, and you can have access to the item ID from the request.params ID. So this line of code, grab the item ID. So let's proceed to create a variable to hold the updated item, right? And that's going to be from our request body, request.body. And the next line of code is to create an index to check for the item we want to update if it's available, right? So I'll be creating an index variable. So in here, I'll take our item list, which has find index method. So in here, we can have access to the item, right? And we check for the item ID if it's equal to the ID from the request.params. There you go. So let's make that check over here. If our index is not equal to -1, meaning our item is really in the list, right? So if our index is not equal to -1, we set the item list of the index that particular item we want to update. We now update that with what? Our updated item variable. Then we proceed to set the response.json with our updated item. Else we set the response status code to 404 with a custom message of item not found. So that's basically the update method, right? So the delete functionality is going to be the same. First of all, you need to grab the ID from the request params.id, right? And also you need to find the index of the item you want to delete if it's in the list. So we'll be doing something similar over here, which first of all check if our index is not equal to -1. That shows the item is really in the list. Then we create a variable to hold the deleted item. And that deleted item is going to be, we take our item list and splice. Then we pass in our index, we want to delete, 1. Then we set our response .json to our deleted item of the first index. Else, you are going to do something similar by setting the response .code to 404 with a custom message of item not found. So that's basically it. So let's run our server to see. So node server.js will run your server app. You can see our app is listening on port 3000 over here. So when you check localhost 3000 /API /version1 /items, there you go. You can see we get back our list of items over here. So initially we just created only one item, right, with an ID of 1 and a name here, and our server is running successfully. So the front end folder basically contains a Flutter application. So within the lib folder, the main.dat file comes with a default counter app. So I'll just run the Flutter app over here. So Flutter run. So this is the default counter the Flutter app comes with, right? So when you click on the button, the value increase. So I'll just get rid of the comments and also the default home page widget over here. So that's the next step, and create a home page and start everything from scratch. So let's create a file within the lib folder and name the file as item.dat. So that's where we are going to model our item entity. So we'll be creating a class of item. The class is going to be taking a string of an ID and also a string of name. So the item require the ID and the name, and we need to require that in the constructor as well. There we go. So let's proceed by creating from JSON method of the item. So factory item from JSON, which takes in the JSON, and the JSON is of type map of string and dynamic. So map of string and dynamic, and the JSON. So in here we return our item, then the ID, use the JSON to access the ID. We'll be doing same for the name. With the name, use the JSON to access the name. So this is the way we create from JSON method, right? So once we are done, let's save in the changes over here. So within the main.dat file, first of all, let's import the HTTP package for making requests. All right, so I'll add it to my passport.yml file. So once we have that installed, let's proceed with fetching the data from our server, right? So first of all, we need to bring in our server URL, and that's pointing to the localhost 3000. So first of all, let's fetch the data we have. So the data is going to bring us a list of items, right? So it's going to be of type future, and I'm going to name the function as fetch items. It's going to be an asynchronous function. So within the fetch items function, we'll be creating a response variable over here. And the response variable will be await, and we call the HTTP package. First of all, we need to import the HTTP package. So we import that as HTTP. So once we have that imported, call upon the HTTP. So in that, we can pass our server URL /API /version1 /items. So we check the response status code. If that's equal to 200, meaning everything went okay. we create a variable known as the item list, and we decode our response body, right? So JSON decode, then we pass in our response.body. Then we create another variable, that's the items, right? So we base on our item list a map. So and for each item, we are going to pass that from JSON, right? So we're going to be item dot from JSON, then we pass in the item. There you go. So we need to convert that to a list as well. So once we have that, we can just return the items over here. So if the response details code is not equal to 200, we throw an exception that with a custom message over here. So the exception is going to be fail to fetch items. Yeah. So once you have that, you can just save in the changes. So within our scaffold, with the body argument, you can start with a safe area view. So the child of the safe area is going to be a column. The column takes in the children, right? So with the children of the column, you start with the future builder. So the future builder takes in the future and the builder. The future is going to listen to a function, so we will provide it the fetch items function, and the builder is basically a function that takes in the context and also the snapshot. So the snapshot is what holds the data. So let's get rid of the cons in here. So first of all, check the state of the snapshot. So if snapshot dot has data, then we can return our list view dot builder, right? So the list view dot builder also takes in the item builder, and the item builder is basically a function that takes in the context and also the index. And also the list view builder also takes in the item count, right? So with the item count of the list view builder, you access that from the snapshot.data.length, the length of the data we are fetching. There we go. So within the item builder, we create an item variable and access our item from our index. Sorry, we access the data and pass in our index over here. There you go. So in here we can return a list style, right? So the list style takes in the title, and the title is in turn going to take in the text widget. So we provide it our item.name, so we can actually see the data name that's being fetched. So else if the snapshot state has an error, right, we check for that. So if snapshot that has error, we'll be returning a center widget, right, with the text of the error being shown on the screen. So snapshot.error, then we convert that to a string. So we need to pass the child to the center. There we go. So the default case, we are going to return a loading indicator that shows that. So we return a loading, a circular progress indicator. So it's kind of a loading indicator that shows that something's about to be loaded, right? So let's try it out. So Flutter run. There you go. We are having an error related to the client with the socket exception. That's what happening because we've not started our server yet, right? So we need to start our server. So node server.js, you can see our server is now running on port 3000. So let's reload our app again. Type int is not a subtype of string. We need to change this to an integer. There you go. Let's reload again. we are still having an error type. List of dynamic is not a subtype. This is because the item list we are receiving here is of type dynamic, right? So a list of dynamic, and the items here we are also receiving is a list of item, right? So I think this will resolve the error. Another error was thrown. That's an overflow error. So let's provide a shrink wrap to the list view builder. So we pass that a true. So I think that should be it. There we go. You can see our data is now showing on the emulator or simulator. So you are having access to this name because of this item list we created over here. So that's basically it. Let's proceed with adding of items, right? So in adding of item, it's also going to be a feature, and the function name is going to be add item. That takes in the name of the item to be added, and the name of the item to be added as a parameter. So you pass that, and it's going to be an asynchronous call as well. So in here we proceed to create a response variable. Then we await and call upon the http dot post, right? So we need to pass the URI.pass to make sure that the URL is in a valid format before it is being used by the HTTP package. So we need to pass in as URL. We can also proceed to pass in the headers, right? So with the headers, we set the content type to be application/JSON. So since we are posting something or adding something, we need to pass in the body, right? So we proceed to pass in the body as well. So we encode, then we pass in as an object the name. So once you have that, we check the status of the response, right? If the status of the response is equal to 201, meaning there was successful creation of an item, we create a JSON and decode the response body. Then we proceed to create the item we get back. So item from JSON, then we pass in a JSON. And finally, we can return our item over here. So if the status code of the response is not equal to 201, then we throw an exception that failed to add an item. So that should be it. So let's start with the implementation. So the body, the scaffold is going to text in the floating action button. So the floating action button takes in the on press. That's going to be the function that gets called when the button is pressed. So it also takes in the child. So with the child, we provide it an icon and a plus icon, yeah. So we can just provide an additional information, that's the tooltip, that takes in a string of add item. So with the on press of the floating action button, we are going to show a dialog, right? So the dialog takes in the context and the builder, and the builder is a function that is in the context, right? So we'll be returning an alert dialog, right? So return an alert dialog. So the alert dialog takes in the title. So the title, we are going to assign a test of add item. It also takes in the content, right? So with the content, we provide a test form field. So let's set the controller to the name controller, right? Which is not yet created, so I'll be creating it sooner. So I'll create it over here. So final name controller, and that's going to be of type test editing controller. There you go. So we can just provide a label test to the test form field as well. So the decoration takes in the input decoration, then we set the label, then we pass in add item or item name, I think it's supposed to be a label test, right? Yeah, it's supposed to be a label test. So the actions of the alert dialog is going to be a test button, right? With a cancel and also the add test button. So the first one is going to be the cancel button. So once we press the cancel button, we are going to pop off the context. So we use navigator.pop, then pass in the context. So the child is going to take in the text of cancel. So we also be creating another test button to the actions, right? So the actions is just a list that takes in, it's an array that takes in a list of widgets, right? So you can add another test button over here. So the test is going to be add, right? So with the on press of the add button, you are going to add an item. So we can call the add item function, which expects a string of name. So we pass in the name controller.test. Then we set state and clear the input. Then so let's give it a try. So let's hot reload. You can see the floating action button over there. You can see the add item. So let's proceed to add an item. There we go. You can see our item is being added, but we didn't pop off the context, right? So that's the next step to do. So once we've added the item, you need to pop off the context. So navigator.pop, then you pass in the context. So let's give it a try. So let's add another item. There we go. You can see our post is working, right? So the next step is what? Update the item, right? So that's the next step. So in updating the item, it's follow the same format, right? It's going to be of type future. The return type is void, right? We don't expect anything back in updating the item. So in updating the item, it takes in the item ID and also the name field, right? So it's going to be an asynchronous function as well. So in here we create a response variable, and the response variable use the HTTP, then the put request. We pass our URL to make sure it's in a valid format. We pass in our server URL / our endpoint, which is API / version 1 / items. Then we pass in the ID that needs to be updated. So we need to pass in the headers as well. With the headers, let's set the content type to be application /JSON, and also provide a body. So the body is going to be JSON encode. It accepts an object. So we pass in the name, then give it to the name. So let's check the status of the response, right? So if the response status code, if that's not equal to 200, we are going to throw an exception. Fail to update an item. Yeah. So let's start to implement. So with a list style, we give it a trailing argument, right? That puts the icon at the very end. So it's going to contain an icon of edit. Let's actually wrap the icon within a widget, and the widget is going to be an icon button. We want to make it pressable. So it takes in the on press. This expects an icon. There you go. So with the on press of this, we'll be doing something similar in adding. We'll be showing a dialog. So I'll just paste in this. So let's hot reload. There you go. You can see the icon over there, right? So instead of adding the item, we'll be editing the item this time, and also we'll be editing. There you go. So the function is not going to add item anymore. This time around, we're going to update the item. So we need to pass in the ID of the item we need to update, and we can access that from the item.id. Then we pass in our name controller.text. So let's give it a try. Let's hot reload to see the new changes. On handle exception, failed to update item. Okay, let's visit our server. So in updating the item, we need to make sure that the request params bring us an integer, right? So we preface it with a plus icon. And also in the updated icon, we need to pass in the item ID, and the name is going to be from the request body name. So let's start our server again. There you go. You can see we have a successful. Now, so let's try to add one more item. Let's try to update that particular item. There we go. So our update is now working. So let's move on to the last functionality. That's the deletion, right? So it's pretty much similar to the update item function, right? So the function needs to be changed to delete item. This one, it expects only the ID, right? We don't need the body and the headers as well. So in here, we also check the response status code. If that's not equal to 200, you give it fail to delete item. So let's preface this with plus icon. We expect an integer from the request params ID. Let's start our server again. So let's add an icon next to the edit icon, right? So where the trailing is, you need to wrap the icon button within a row widget, right? The row expects a children. That's a list of widgets. And let's set the main access size to be main access size dot main. So we can add an additional icon button. That's the delete functionality. So you can see it takes in the on press and also the icon. So the icon, we are going to give it the delete icon. There you go. So on press of this icon, we are going to call the function to delete the item. So we call it's going to be an asynchronous function. So we can just call the delete item, then pass in an item.id. I think that should be it. Let's give it a try. Let's add an item. Let's try to delete an item. It needs to be http.delete, not put, right? So let's make that changes. So once we delete, we need to set the state to rebuild. There we go. So let's try to delete. There you go. You can see the delete is working. Let's add an item. Let's add another item. Let's try to delete, and it seems to be working. So that's basically it. If you find this to be useful and interesting, consider subscribing, share, and also like the video as well. See you in our next tutorial. Until then, stay tuned.